Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marston, and today we're taking a look at Genesis chapter 21. Right, so we remember how God has called out Abraham and promised that his descendants will bring about the restoration of creation and humanity. The only problem is Abraham and Sarah don't have any kids, and God said, don't worry about that. I will provide. I'm going to provide a promised son for you. And only I'm going to be able to get the glory because you guys are so old and Sarah is barren. And through God's provision, Abraham's descendants will multiply. Problem is, Abraham and Sarah haven't always been faithful to that vision, to that trust, right? They flee to Egypt as soon as there's a famine. They lie and scheme with Pharaoh and Abimelech and try to give Sarah away. And worst of all, Sarah gave up her servant Hagar to Abraham so that he could have a child with her, and he does. That's Ishmael. The problem is that's not God's promised son. God can't get the glory from that human plan, that human scheme. So Ishmael is not the promised son. We do see, though, that God is always going to keep his word, especially in this chapter. Isaac is going to come. The problem is, because of Abraham and Sarah's past sins and past mistrust of God, it's going to create tension, it's going to create problems, right? So Genesis chapter 21 is going to answer the question, do God's promises undo the consequences of sin, right? Just because God promised something to me, is that going to absolve me of all consequences of sin? The answer is no. Let's see how that unfolds in Abraham and Sarah's story. Then the Lord took note of Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. So God keeps his promise, right? Abraham and Sarah bear a child in their old age, and it's not because of their own plans or deceptions or schemes. It's only because of trust and dependence on God alone. Whether they deserved it or not, God promised it, and he's true to his word, and Isaac is born. Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne a son in his old age. Right, so the word Isaac means laughter. That's what his name means. Isaac is the word for laughter in Hebrew. And it's a reminder back in chapters 17 and 18 when God told Abraham and God told Sarah that they would have kids with each other. What did they do? The first thing they do was laughed because they didn't believe it. They laughed in God's face. But now that laughter has been flipped from scoff to a delight. Right? It's gone from, psh, I can't believe it, to, wow, I can't believe it. And Sarah says, all those who hear about it will laugh with me. Right? That reminds us of chapter 12 and the promise to Abraham that through him and through his descendants, all the families of the earth would be blessed. Remember, God's ultimate purpose in this is not to just bless Abraham and Sarah, but to bless the entire world. All who hears about Isaac is going to laugh with her and be delighted. So this is great news. What could possibly go wrong? Oh yeah, Abraham has another kid. I wonder how he feels about this. Now Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, mocking. Right, and so that word mocking is also is the word Isaac, is laughing. Right, so there is laughter spreading around the camp, but it's a mocking laughter from Ishmael. And he's probably a little frustrated knowing that when God fulfilled his promise to Abraham, it's a threat to his inheritance as the firstborn son of Abraham. Therefore she, being Sarah, said to Abraham, drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not be an heir with my son Isaac. And Sarah is more than a little insecure about this whole situation too, right? She thinks it'd be best to just kick Hagar and Ishmael out of the camp and leave them to the wolves. Of course, I mean, her insecurity isn't unwarranted, right? I mean, Abraham has already tried to give her away twice, but she sees Ishmael's existence as the firstborn, and don't forget, that was her idea to begin with. She sees that as a threat to Isaac's inheritance. So just like Abraham's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen, there's strife in the camp. Nobody is getting along, and Abraham's going to have to make a choice. There's not room for both of them. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the lad and your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her. For through Isaac your descendants shall be named. And of the son of the maid I will make a nation also, because he is your descendant." So Abraham seeks God's wisdom in this situation, and that's good. And God responds, hey, listen to Sarah. Not because what she's telling you to do is right necessarily, but because it's through Isaac that I'm going to name your descendants. Isaac is the child I provided to you guys. Isaac is the son that glorifies me. His very existence proves what I've done for you. And so I'm going to use him. So listen to Sarah. Of course, this is a concession because listening to Sarah's voice is what got us in this whole mess in the first place. It was Sarah's idea to tell Abraham to take Hagar as his wife. But God gives Abraham comfort in promising that both boys, both children, will have many descendants and be great nations. He's finding a way to keep both promises, the one he made to Ishmael and the one he made to Abraham about Isaac. He's finding a way to keep both those promises, even when they seem contradictory. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, and gave her the boy and sent her away. She departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. Now, Abraham must have a lot of faith in God's promise here because he doesn't send Hagar and Ishmael out with very much. One loaf of bread and one skin of water for a single mother and for a growing teenage boy to last them through this arduous journey through the wilderness. I mean, Abraham, you have tons of money, you have livestock, you have riches that God has blessed you with, and you can't give more than a loaf of bread and one skin of water to your son? It doesn't really seem like he has their best interest at heart. It seems like he's kind of playing out of sight, out of mind with his firstborn son. I mean, that's kind of cruel. When the water in the skin was used up, she left the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him, about a bow shot away. For she said, "Do not let me see the boy die." And she sat opposite him, and lifted up her voice and wept. God heard the lad crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter with you, Hagar? Do not fear, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up your lad, and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. God was with the lad, and he grew, and he lived in the wilderness and became an archer. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. So Ishmael and Hagar are at their lowest. They're literally sitting down to die. And God says, "I hear you." Remember, that's what Ishmael means. God hears, just like in chapter 16, when God appeared to Hagar in the wilderness and told her to name her son Ishmael. It happens again. And God says, "I hear you." And God provides for them and allows him to grow up into a great nation just like he had promised Abraham and just like he had promised Hagar. And then speaking of wells, the rest of this chapter deals with a short story about Abraham and the king he deceived back in chapter 20, Abimelech. Abimelech comes to him and says, "Hey, we need to make this peace treaty because I can't trust you guys. You guys have lied to me and it got us in some bad trouble. Just don't lie to us anymore and we'll have peace." And Abraham says, "Sure, fine." But he's a little salty about it. And Abimelech is like, "What's up? What's the matter?" And he said, "Well, I've got these wells that I had dug out, but your people keep using them, taking them over and stuff." And he's like, "Well, I didn't know that those were your wells." And Abraham's like, "Yeah, those were my wells." So he ends up providing another extra 7 lambs to the covenant sacrifice agreement so that he would pay for those wells. And Abimelech says, "Sure, those are your wells now, Abraham." Now, it's kind of an odd story, but it's going to play a bigger role later down the line, especially with Isaac. But he also ends up planting a tree there, and he names the place Beersheba because he and Abimelech made a covenant there together. That's what Beersheba means. And it says that Abraham called on the name of the Lord there. And it's giving a little picture of that lost Eden, right? We have the tree, we have the wells and the water, we've got humankind at peace, right? And it's a little unstable. It's not perfect, it's not ideal, but it's a picture of what we've been trying to recover. Abraham's family and his descendants will go on to recover that that Eden, that paradise, that relationship with God and man, heaven and earth united together. That's what Abraham's mission has all been about. And so this story in Beersheba is a little microcosm of that, reminding us what we're after. In Genesis 21, we see that God's promises do not undo the consequences of sin, right? We all have unlimited grace and mercy, but we still deal with natural consequences of our sin. In this story, it was Abraham and Sarah and Hagar having to figure out, which kid is going to get the inheritance. I've got to shaft one of them, and that's because of my disobedience earlier. And sometimes other people have to deal with the consequences of our sins, right? Hagar and Ishmael would have died if it wasn't for God's intervention. Abraham would have sent them to their deaths. Now, they weren't, perfectly blameless, right? Ishmael was mocking Isaac. Hagar taunted Sarah back in chapter 16. But their near-death experience is still a direct result of Abraham's infidelity and Sarah's plot to try and scheme God's promises for her own terms, right? And that's why it's important to remember that God always keeps his promises, and we should trust and depend on him to provide those promises. Sometimes it looks like God's promises are contradictory or at odds, and sometimes it seems like humans are really going to screw up God's plan. But God provides through any and all circumstances. And that's an important theme, remembering that through all of Abraham and Sarah's flaws, God will use them to bring back Eden, a restored creation where God and humans can be in relationship back in the world together. And so that's what Genesis chapter 21 is all about. God is providing on the promises, but it's bittersweet because of Abraham and Sarah's past sin. And so we're going to see in the next chapter where Abraham's true allegiance really lies. It's going to be his big test, his final kind of climactic test after all the ups and downs he's had in his story so far. We're going to see where he really stands with God. So I hope you come back for that, but this has been 1189. Thanks for watching, and God bless. Have a good day.